It appears as though we have arrived at the point of gender equality. I am informed by the Clerk of Parliament, who has close to 40 years experience, that what just happened, the announcement of the Speaker by a female, was the first time in parliamentary history. And so, Madam Sergeant, you can approach, because we want to make record of this moment. And I would ask the clerk to get the information with respect to your rank, number, and name, so that the records of the House can properly reflect this moment. Thank you very much. Honorable members, when the business of this House suspended for lunch, the Honorable Member for Angleton had reserved the floor. The Chair now recognizes the Honorable Member for Angleton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, it is my privilege and honor to rise on behalf of the good people of Angleton. Good people of Angleton, Mr. Speaker. And Speaker, you know, I was in the Angleton community a few days ago at the E.P. Roberts Primary School in Angleton, which the statistics are now showing is the highest performing primary school in that region, in Angleton. It is also the school...
I'll bind for that.
Thank you. It is also a school that was under the prior administration, under the then Minister of Education, Honorable Jerome Fitzgerald, the subject of a redevelopment of more than $2.5 million in the redevelopment of that school. It is producing some of the finest young Bahamians in this country, many of whom will go forward and build a great nation. And they are of the great community of Angleton, Mr. Speaker. And Speaker, I am proud to represent the fine people of that community, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, it is amazing to watch. And if you don't laugh, you will cry. How members of this administration use language and fancy words to describe their actions, but which do not comport in any shape or form with the meaning of their actions. It is shameless and bogus and audacious and in your face, Mr. Speaker. Words like transparency and accountability have been ringing in this Parliament today, all day from the side opposite, in bellicose tones with puffed up chests. But every day in this country, we learn that this administration is the most duplicitous, yea, even diabolical administration we have ever seen post-1967, Speaker. They are far from...
Honorable Member.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. This administration, I'm not talking about any member, Mr. Speaker.
Those two words, though.
Yes, diabolical and duplicitous. These words have meaning, and I will demonstrate the meaning, Speaker.
They are offensive.
Well, they're very offensive to the Bahamian people, Mr. Speaker. We are offended by this behavior, Mr. Speaker. We're offended. I'm not targeting a member, Mr. Speaker. You're not defending a member, Mr. Speaker. I'm talking about an administration, Speaker. In this Parliament, we're not talking about members. We're talking about members.
Honorable Member, I would permit you to proceed, but you cannot talk about an administration. An administration is made up of the members.
Mr. Speaker, the member, you know, the member...
It's impossible to speak of an administration without making reference to the members, whether it be direct or indirect.
Speaker, the member for Freetown called my name in terms of talking about corruption, Speaker. I didn't hear no one defending me in here. Angleton needs defense too, Mr. Speaker. Angleton needs defense. The word corruption used with the Hannah Martin, you heard the member for Freetown, Speaker? So I would proceed, Mr. Speaker. I'm talking about administration made up of members. And I was named my specific name, not even the constituency. That's not allowed, really, but it was allowed, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, they are far from transparent. In fact, they are the opposite to transparent, and they are nowhere near accountable to the Bahamian people. In fact, they defy accountability with straight faces. And, Mr. Speaker, in the interest of transparency, which they hold like some gaudy giant trophy in this House, tell us, Speaker, the Bahamian people, how much is the Office of the Attorney General and the Bahamas government paying foreign Queen's Counsel to pursue prosecutions involving former political opponents? Tell us now, how much of our tax dollars is being paid out in this exercise, Mr. Speaker? I want the Minister of Finances right there, stand up and tell the Bahamian people, be transparent and we're accountable. Tell us, Mr. Speaker, tell us how much of our tax dollars is being paid out in this exercise, Ms. Curran. Be transparent and accountable. You say you're accountable and transparent, so why have we not yet seen this travel report detailing expenditure from the public treasury for travel of the Prime Minister and ministers for the past almost 2 years, which was promised to be published repeatedly and most recently promised to be disclosed by last December? We're in February now, by the Prime Minister, no less. Where's the report? But you tell us you are transparent and accountable, Mr. Speaker. So, why were not the Bahamian people told that this government created new executive chairman posts for boards where no executive chairman existed before now? Mr. Speaker, you will recall the budget debate where the Prime Minister was asked precisely by Engliston how many such posts, executive chairman posts, have been created since they took office. And you will recall the member said he was not sure and he'd get back to us. Speaker, the member should have now inquired of the person who had the authority to make such appointments and be in a position to advise the Bahamian people in the interest of transparency and accountability, and as to who he has appointed, or whoever's appointed, because he didn't know. As we continue to wait to know what is the increased cost in government by way of political appointments to the Bahamian people. Speaker, as this government is so committed to transparency, why were new perks and or benefits given to cabinet ministers from the public purse, but no accounting as to this added burden on the Bahamian people? We heard about it by happenstance in the budget debate after being questioned.
What perk?
You want me to go through it?
Yeah.
Yes, yes, it is. It's free gasoline, which was unprecedented for each cabinet minister, and before cabinet minister, going back to an Ingram administration, cabinet ministers paid for gasoline, and this administration gave free gasoline to itself, Speaker. Oh, the member says tuck shop, eh? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, but I hope the Bahamian people know it's tuck shop. It's tuck shop, Mr. Speaker. Because you are committed to transparency, and you say you despise secrecy, Mr. Speaker, where is the EIA report for the Oban project in East Grand Bahama? And where is the transparency in the shifting narrative of the heads of agreement, and who signed what, and who is really who in the musical chairs of this company, and the document laid in this parliament, and allegations of misleading the Bahamian people as to who signed it, when they signed it? Where is the transparency and accountability there? Now we're hearing the deal is nonsense, Speaker. But when the Prime Minister gave a communication in this Parliament, he described it as something wonderful and fantastic for East Grand Bahama, Speaker. Speaker, if these people are so, if the members are so transparent and accountable in our beautiful democracy, why have they been so amenable to serve the interests of the wealthy and powerful, as we saw in the capitulation to life at peace on the issue of taxation, and the change of law to accommodate multi-billion-dollar foreign oil companies, but to cut back on assistance to the poor, including children living in poverty conditions? How that could be transparent, that you favor the wealthy over the most vulnerable in our country, Mr. Speaker? Why have you increased tax burdens on the heads of struggling Bahamians when you claimed in opposition you were fundamentally, not just opposed, fundamentally opposed to such measures? You spoke of the pain and suffering and how so very wrong that was. Yet you came within 12 months and completely reversed your principal position. If you are so transparent and accountable, why are the allegations of corruption which you levied against the previous administration, and which every day is coming under scrutiny and proving over and over to be false and malicious, Mr. Speaker. Why is that, Mr. Speaker? This transparent and accountable administration. I heard the member for Freetown repeat allegations of corruption. I just tell him, be careful. I'll leave it just like that, Speaker. Be careful. Speaker, the minister today on tourism touted the successes in tourism and the positive impact on our economy. But he knows, and this administration knows, and the IMF reports and all of their documentation shows that the positive impact is strongly responsible. The Bahama project is a significant contributor to the expanding capacity in our tourism project and the domino effect. But this is the same project that the member for Freetown, who being so proud just a moment ago, when he recites the statistics of the overnight visitors, et cetera, and the increased airlift, it was that same project that he said that was horribly undesirable for the Bahamas. That's what he said. In fact, he referenced Bahama and the Hilton. But now we're hearing it now as some great intervention by this administration, Speaker. Of course, at the time, he was on the board of the former owner and singing that tune. But like he advised us, he now works for a new employer, the Bahamian people, and so he's singing a new tune, and at least he confessed it. I guess you can say that is being transparent and accountable. Bahama has been critical to this economy, but you misled the Bahamian people in your public pronouncement in opposition, trying to scuttle the deal. It was Kalani who said the opening was fake. Do I have time to quote from Kalani? The member for Kalani said, he said that we are less than 3 weeks away from the fake opening of Bahama. And once again, we are to take the orchestrators of this mess at their word. And then he goes on and he says, and this is what he pledges, with your vote for the F&M, the years of secrecy, the impulsive deceit, and the lack of accountability will yield, what a wonderful word, to an era in which the government serves its people. Bahamians deserve a government that works, and on and on and blah, and on and on and on. That's what he said then, Mr. Speaker. But it was Kalani who boycotted the Hyatt, that was Hyatt, high-end name in the world. But in a flash, after he had won election, he was there ringing the SLS bell, beaming broadly. The duplicity is transparent. That's the transparency. And there will be accountability, Speaker. We recall the shifting narrative in the first budget speech, where it was clear that the impact of hurricanes had a deleterious and dramatic impact on our economy. And this is what comes out of that budget debate, because we're talking about transparency and accountability. And this is what was said. On the one hand, the hurricane severely dampened economic activity in October. This is the words now, severely dampened. With the impact extended and through to the fourth quarter of the year. Impact extended to the fourth quarter. As a result, it is estimated that real GDP in 2016 posted a 0 rate of growth for the year as a whole. As a result, this directly weakened revenue collection. Directly weakened revenue collection. In combination, these factors resulted in a shortfall in recurrent revenue collections to the tune of $216 million. And then he goes on to say, weaker revenues thus account for a significant portion of the $400 million slippage in the GFS deficit. That's close to almost half. Just that one event had that effect, hurricane. And then he goes on to say, Hurricane Matthew also affected the expenditure side. That's revenue now. 0. Extended. Severe. Now we're talking about expenditure side of the budget. through the actions implemented by the government to assist in the rebuilding efforts and the repair of public infrastructure. For example, the capital expenditures of the Ministry of Public Works were bolstered by over $55 million over and above its budget allocation. That's another $55 million. Total capital expenditures thus amounted to $310 million versus the $242 million budgeted. In addition, recurrent expenditures during the year amounted to some $137 million more than had been forecast. And it goes on. And so this is the effect, that the hurricane had on our country. Mr. Speaker, we were criticized at that time for, I think the word used was some fiscal imprudence or some words that was used, caused by, in the own language of the Minister of Finance, the hurricane had a serious, severe impact on our economy. And, you know, we're not responsible for hurricanes. I think all of us are intelligent to know that PLP didn't bring a hurricane, Speaker. We were criticized for shifting the policy on CRIF, or whatever you call it, the insurance, regional insurance policy. But now we see, so that was the position then. Right. But now we see so much emphasis on hurricanes. And in fact, in this very report, it's denoted as what is called a severe risk. In this same report we're talking about today, hurricanes are now called a severe risk. But in the budget debate 2 years ago, we were carrying the bag for harm caused by a hurricane, Mr. Speaker. But now we have so much emphasis on hurricanes, so much talks about the effect on economies. And I want to ask, Mr. Speaker, because we've been talking about transparency and accountability. Was there transparency about the real impact of natural disasters on national economies when you brought the first F&M budget to this House? Because while you had that in there from the Ministry of Finance, you had the political rhetoric which undermined the factual situation. Were you being transparent and accountable when you diverted public funds and resources to help assist the nation down south, ravaged by hurricanes, but you turned your face away from our own people in Ragged Island?
Don't say that.
Is that transparent and accountable?
Don't say that.
Then we remember talk of the missing VAT money and the $42 million that could not be found. And you know, the media, you have to give them credit because they were very dogged. When you say these things in the Parliament, they go and follow it up. And they asked the minister about it. Well, first of all, the minister said, he said that this is all the narrative about corruption and all that, which every day they're seeing was a manufacture. But you look at the issue of the $42 million in the Parliament.
What is that?
This is, I'm quoting from the Minister of Finance, the PLP government, and it's a report of the, this is the Tribune, and it's reporting the proceedings of the House.
Just give the date.
October 11th, 2017.
You're adopting.
Yes, thank you. I'm adopting it, yes. And this is what he says. The PLP government, we suspect, obtained a resolution to borrow $150 million on hurricane relief, but instead diverted $40 million plus of that sum for unauthorized expenditure on any number of things in an ultimate vain effort to buy an election win. And while that money most likely went to their cronies and other wasteful spending, it is the Bahamian people who are now stuck with the bill. That's what the minister said in Parliament. The media pursued it. And I'm adopting this. This is another Tribune report, November 2nd, 2017. And this is what they say. When asked how the search, because he said he's trying to find this $40 million. When asked how that search was going, Turnquest said, I'm not trying to find $42 million.
He didn't say that.
And then they pressed it when asked for clarification on whether a search for the $42 million is ongoing. He said no, because ain't nothing to find. Asked for further clarification, responded, am I speaking Greek? The money is in the consolidated fund, just as they said. He continued, referring to members of the Progressive Liberal Party. I presume it is. I don't know if it's there or not. They said that it's in this consolidated fund. I have no reason to not believe them. This is what we were told, and the Bahamian people were told that we basically thief $40 million, Mr. Speaker, of our cronies, gave it to our cronies. Who are these cronies, Mr. Speaker? But the minister later came back and said, no, we don't see but you hold in power now. We're interested in what you're doing. We want to know what you're doing, Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, was the minister being absolutely transparent and accountable with the first version of events, or the second version when the story and then the newspaper says he waffled? That's the word they use, waffled. Waffle, all over the place. The Minister of Finance waffling in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker.
Not East Grand Bahama.
They put out into the public domain the specter of a devaluation of currency, insinuating that it was the actions of a prior administration which led to this possibility and the horrifying specter of being devalued, and used this as a rationale to introduce VAT. And the Prime Minister used this, and I believe the Minister of Finance did, but I will not put it on him because I can't recall if he did. The Prime Minister did. The Prime Minister said, this is when he was rationalizing VAT. He said, we don't want our country to spiral to crisis. We don't want devaluation where people lose the value of their savings and investments. We don't want to be forced by international lenders to fire thousands of public servants as a condition. He goes on and on. And so he had to introduce VAT. But when there were social media reports about devaluation, the Minister of Finance had a very different view about those type of claims. Now, bear in mind now, the Prime Minister said it directly in this House. But when it was speculated out there, the Minister of Finance, the Deputy Prime Minister, and I'm reading from the Tribune, Neil Hartnell, and this is the date on this I do not have. I can get the date for you. It's from the Tribune, and it's the report by Neil Hartnell. And this is what the Deputy Prime Minister says. He yesterday slammed false rumors of a 35% currency devaluation and second VAT hike as, and these are the words, unpatriotic, for threatening the Bahamas' economic stability. Speaker, there's the accountability and transparency, Mr. Speaker. And then, they chastise the former administration for making policy decisions contrary to the referendum on gaming. There was a referendum. There was a result where those who voted against it. That administration nevertheless brought legislation to regularize the gaming industry. Highly criticized by this administration. And I could tell you the nature of the language that was used. I mean, the Prime Minister, and this is from the Tribune, 8th of September 24th, no, sorry, this is from Jones, 8th of September 2014 report, which I adopt.
Bahama Channel?
Bahama Journal, sorry, yes, Bahama Journal. And he said, the FNM has supported and will continue with the people, the Bahamian people voted in the referendum, and the Bahamian people said no, and he said, the Prime Minister said he will honor the outcome. The Bahamians will generally, he said, I think that Bahamians will generally respect the words of any Prime Minister, but he has shown that his words cannot be trusted, he said during a press conference. He criticized this. But then, and Bahamians are quite intelligent, even those from Angleston, East Grand Bahama. And what we saw members from the administration being asked about a national lottery. And did I mention that was one of the questions on the referendum, and it was equally voted down, equally by the Bahamian people. But now we see the floating now about a national lottery. And the coy responses when ministers were asked directly by the media. You'd think based on the Prime Minister's response, they say, no way, it can't happen. There was a referendum, that's what they, but now everybody coy, transparent and accountable. We need this lovely accountability and transparency on the Alukaya purchase. What is the cost to the Bahamian people? Where is the accountability and transparency when this government awarded a lucrative contract to a company in which a sitting cabinet minister is a major shareholder, having failed to procure unanimous approval of this House? Not a split vote between you and us, Speaker. So many questions, Speaker, about accountability and transparency with this government, Speaker. What we do know, however, that this administration will not know transparency if it kicked them in the backside, Mr. Speaker. And we do know that accountability is out the window. It doesn't live here anymore, Mr. Speaker. The member for Freetown called my name a lot today, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank him, because I'm a politician, keeping my name in the public domain. But I must remind him, but he is the one who holds the office of public trust right now. The heat on him. And so the Bahamian people were disappointed that in several interviews he seemed not to be aware of important matters in his portfolio. The nation, and especially Abaconians, because you know the Marsh Harbor Airport, Leonard M. Thompson International Airport, is the second busiest airport in the nation. And so when you saw that could not accommodate flights after sunset because the lighting was defective, and for so long, they were very disappointed in the minister's responses or lack thereof. The Minister of Tourism and Aviation is here, in my view, blowing hot air when the Abaco runway has been destabilized for weeks, Mr. Speaker. I think it's back up and running now. People at Abaco were very upset. They couldn't believe it. And of course, we have yet to receive a proper report on the Arthurstown Airport? The Arthurstown Airport, the runway. And with all the continuing international audits, he understands what I'm saying to him, and the recurring pressures. We know the member understands that public life is hard work and not braggadocio and bluster. And by the way, did I mention we're still watching Prince George Dock, Speaker? We're also watching the debacle in Abaco with the ferries and the recent environmental concerns of the Abaco Chamber of Commerce and the upsetting of local industry, the ferry industry locally, and the use of public facilities, docking facilities. Where is the transparency and accountability for the people of Abaco, Mr. Speaker? As the member for Exuma and Ragged Island said so forcefully today on our behalf, you're off track in your projections. Your revenues are underperforming. You're not meeting your financial obligations, and multiple vendors await payment. You've not invested in infrastructure as you should, because CW Sawyer Primary School right now, and that's in Mount Moriah, is the source of great concern to the population, student and teacher population, the Mount Moriah constituency. And they're complaining of mold. They say there's structural uncertainty, including the stairwell. I don't know. This is what the parents and children and teachers are saying. And there's some allegation of a sinkhole in the school. So, Mr. Speaker, these are the things. You come here with a pretty book and you type budgeting and numbers. But, you know, you look around you. So, you know, Speaker, it's ironic that you'd come here and boast of your books and your numbers and your macroeconomic statistics when unemployment is growing, the cost of living is skyrocketing, the gap between the rich and poor is growing. Speaker, and they call this a strategic plan, and this is what is happening all around you. What fantasy world is this government living in? We don't live in no book. We don't live in a book, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, in my view, Mr. Speaker, this debate is a waste of parliamentary time and a reflection of a government without any real parliamentary agenda, except, and this is what you're really trying to do, to perpetuate a false perception of transparency and accountability. But then again, Mr. Speaker, we do know that ain't happening in here. That's not the reality of what we're dealing with this government, Mr. Speaker. The 6-month report is now out, and which was released, I think, last week. And in 2 to 3 weeks, we're going to have a mid-year budget presented. So we could have had a true fiscal debate at that time. So the report, although pretty, and it's very nice, I want to commend the Minister of Finance. It is not aligned in the format of a budget, so it doesn't allow us to really understand what is happening. So, Mr. Speaker, you know, it's hard to say what is actually happening from a fiscal point of view or financial point of view in terms of the allocations and how they're being paid. It seems that the Ministry of Finance has just taken the normal report of the central bank on the fiscal outcome and published it as its own report. So no great stride has been made in fiscal transparency, Speaker. None whatsoever, Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for East Grand Bahama on a point of order.
I just couldn't let that go because the member is suggesting or stating that the Ministry of Finance and the hard-working technical offices at the Ministry of Finance, including some very senior persons, both in public service and private, copied or plagiarized the central bank's report. And I want to disabuse her and the public of that view. Going into this report is a lot of hard work by a number of very professional people. And it is disrespectful to them and to the Ministry of Finance in general for her to make such a suggestion. It is patently untrue.
Speaker.
Thank you, honourable member.
There's no disrespect to any public servant in this country, Speaker, and the member should not assert such a thing. I said it is akin to it. It's the same, it's along the same lines. And I've read it, from cover to cover, by the way. I've read it. And I know what's in it. And it has the legislation, and it has some statistics, and it speaks about the objectives, etc. So I've read it, Speaker. And the people of Eggleston don't like disrespect either. I can tell them, listen out for your debates in future, Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to end by saying, no lie lasts forever. Time has the uncanny ability to pull back the curtain of deception. We are seeing this as we speak. The country is seeing it, Mr. Speaker. It's unbelievable. What's happening in this country, Speaker? Unbelievable. It's unbelievable. No, Speaker, it's unbelievable, Speaker. Speaker, it's unbelievable. It is unbelievable what we see happening in this country out there that at the hands of this administration. Unbelievable, Speaker. But time will tell, Mr. Speaker. Time is longer than rope, and time will tell, Mr. Speaker. Time will show. And the Bahamian people will know, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, what you see is not what you get. And I end by saying the Bahamian people must be vigilant and prepared to stand, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, honourable member. As many?
As many. Chair recognizes the member for Yamacraw.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise on behalf of the great constituency of Yamacraw in support of this resolution to debate the fiscal strategy report. Mr. Speaker, before I begin and crave your indulgence, I would just like to set the tone by reading from the International Development Bank, the Bahamas Fiscal Report, Responsibility Bill 2018, and they gave some observations, Mr. Speaker. And they made a number of observations about the bill, and if memory serves me correct, I think the bill, when it was laid, or when it was debated, was supported by the entire members represented, including the other side. I stand to be corrected. But in the conclusion, they said this policy brief has examined the Bahamas Fiscal Responsibility Bill 2018, juxtaposed it against some standard principles that typically guide the formation of a fiscal report framework. Based on our examination, we conclude that the objectives of the Bahamas Fiscal Responsibility Framework are clear, sound, and accord with typical objectives of a standard rule-based framework. We also find that the proposed fiscal responsibility framework, in particular, its embedded fiscal rules are well designed and met the key requirements because they will be enshrined in law with an independent oversight fiscal council to monitor the report on compliance and administrative sanctions in cases of breach. Importantly, the Bahamas' proposed fiscal responsibility framework strikes a good balance between credibility and flexibility to support the development of counter fiscal policies when needed. Overall, the proposed fiscal report framework is a solid one, and if implemented as stipulated in the Fiscal Responsibility Bill of 2018, which will become law in July 2018, it will help to enshrine fiscal discipline, enhance budget transparency and credibility, and improve fiscal accountability and overall fiscal governance. Mr. Speaker, I read that because it was this same institution that looked, along with other international agencies, at some of the things that were happening in the Bahamas with regard to our fiscal disposition. And they had some critical observations. As a matter of fact, I always refer to, and they were private companies that the IDB basically brought disparaging reports and indicated to the world that they should not do business or enter into contracts with certain entities. And even the government of the Bahamas, and I can always remember the edifice, the beautiful edifice that now sits in Fort Phil, the community center, that brought some observation about the way in which funds were dealt with surrounding that institution. And so, Mr. Speaker, before I go into the core of my presentation, I would just like to crave your indulgence. One, to extend condolences having regard to the fact that this is Black History Month. Oh no! Oh no! I can talk, but I can talk, but Island.
And I got a sitting empty right now.
A sitting empty,
Okay.
right for now.
And another one in me.
No. But, you know, there was some, and I'm not stealing the thunder of any of the ministers, but I would like to express condolences and sadness on the untimely death of the Haitian national who died in Bahamian waters, Mr. Speaker. And having regard to the fact that this is Black History Month, a country like Haiti that really dictated the pace in terms of where we are, socially, economically, in terms of what they did some 200 or more years ago. It is right and fitting, Mr. Speaker, to offer my prayers, my support for the family, and say how saddened I am, and express condolences on their passing. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to express condolences for this year. We've had some untimely deaths of young Black men in this country. And I don't mean to be sexist, but to bring attention to it and to express sadness and disgust at this stage of our development, Mr. Speaker, rather than, and we are producing a number of persons from universities, but that too many of them are dying in senseless violence, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was on social media and observed that in celebrating Black History Month, there were a number of persons that Bahamians have identified, and that's all well and good, identified and celebrated their efforts for social, political, and economic change during this month. And I would just like to highlight, and I heard South and Central Andros, they don't speak about Cat Island today. But I can't resist the temptation, Mr. Speaker.
Empty, man.
Any objection?
Peter, don't let this young man free up the law of court.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to recognize
Young member, sir.
Ms. Aldine Ambristo Janetta Roll, and Virginia Roll. And this is probably the 10th time I mentioned this case from Cat Island. And I know that Angliston is very familiar with it, because near and dear to my heart is what the current disposition of land in the Bahamas, the injustices that is wrought to us, Mr. Speaker. And if we're talking about fiscal responsibility, it has more than just to do with the finances, but it has to do with the people, the land, and every resource that is existent in the Bahamas. But, Mr. Speaker, I take this opportunity to represent one of the most important resources, and that is the human resource, for the efforts that those ladies gave in the fight to free the land. And Miss Aldine Ambrista spent 28 days. Janetta Roll spent 28 days in prison. And Virginia Roll spent 28 days in prison. And they appealed, and when they appealed to the Privy Council, they found that they had a good and arguable case, but unfortunately, the files went missing. So, Mr. Speaker, I would just like to highlight those ladies as we celebrate Black History Month. Yeah. And I would also like, as we celebrate Black History Month, Mr. Speaker, in representing those citizens who died from...
Honorable members. Trying to be calm, I'm trying to be cool. Can you all let the member for Yamakura continue his speech?
Yes, I can finish right now. I'm not going to be very long, Mr. Speaker. In representing my condolences for those persons who suffered and died in that ill-fated trip from Haiti, I would also like to recognize the Republic of Haiti and what they did to assist people of color in this diaspora. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I would like to commend the Honorable Deputy Prime Minister for his presentation this morning on the fiscal strategy report. And he was right when he said, in looking at where we are in terms of the progression in which the minister-led government is taking this country, that we are on track. And I would like to refer, Mr. Speaker, as I always do, to the speech from the throne, where Her Excellency Governor General of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, Dame Marguerite Penland, and I quote, said, "My government will strengthen the accountability and transparency of the fiscal operations of government in the Ministry of Finance. My government will introduce public procurement regulations under the Fiscal Administration and Audit Act. My government will be introducing legislation to allow the government to meet its international obligations with respect to financial regulations and supervision. The national development of the Bahamas is, and she says, is the collective responsibility of all citizens through the strategic and purposeful work of the government. Our aspirations will be greatly enhanced by the ties we forge with our partners in the regional and international communities." And Mr. Speaker, the fiscal strategy report, Mr. Speaker, is a part of a strategic plan of this government. Is a part of the strategic plan of this government, Mr. Speaker. And I've heard from the side opposite that there is not a legislative agenda. But, Mr. Speaker, I've spoken before, and I've sought to lay the framework. And, Mr. Speaker, it was by no fluke or by no mistake that we passed the Proceeds of Crime Act, Mr. Speaker, that looked at unexplained wealth. Because when we look at the fiscal strategy report and what it's intended to do, Mr. Speaker, its purpose is to cause greater accountability, greater transparency in the way that we deal with public funds. And the objective of the Act, Mr. Speaker, is to establish the principles and procedure of responsible fiscal management, to guide the formulation and implementation of fiscal objectives, to guide the annual budget within a medium of fiscal framework, and to facilitate effective parliamentary and public scrutiny of the fiscal performance of government. Mr. Speaker, in going through the Act, and I've heard everything, and I'm grateful that the opposition, and I don't hear any objections, supported this Act. This Act is broken down into a number of different factions, but having regard to what I saw, I'm coming into government shortly after the 2017 general election. The Act also speaks to the content of a pre-election update report. And that pre-election update report, Mr. Speaker, is significant. Because the pre-election update report should contain updates on microeconomic forecasts and assumptions from the fiscal strategy report or mid-year review, whichever is most recent. But it requires you, Mr. Speaker, to give a projection 7 days after the calling of an election. What we saw, Mr. Speaker, was that a number of contracts was given out just before the elections, and that's why the IDB commended the Bahamas. That's why the IMF and civil society, even though they had their observations, they commended the Bahamas in bringing to fruition these acts. And I spoke, Mr. Speaker, about the Proceedings of Crime Act. There's also, we've laid the Integrity Commission, Mr. Speaker, which for the first time in the history of the Bahamas, like the Fiscal Responsibility Act, a government did not just speak about codes of conduct for parliamentary officials, but actually brought the legislation. Historical, Mr. Speaker. There's also the public procurement legislation that we're looking at. And every time I think about the public procurement legislation as we're going through it now, Mr. Speaker, and preparing to bring it, I think about Wolf Road, where millions of dollars was expended on a project. The church, and rightfully so, said that they didn't get any of the funds. And the building is non-existent. And I do recall the Minister of Education trying to get to the bottom of it. And any number of contracts that were entered into, Mr. Speaker, just before the election. And Mr. Speaker, I want to say that this is an historical piece of legislation.
Point of order. Chair recognizes member for Jet Island, Ramchi.
The member alluded to a contract given just before the election. There are millions of... No. That's what I heard. He could clarify it a bit. And if you want to assist him in clarifying it, I don't mind. But the Speaker, what I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, is that I understood him to say that millions of dollars were spent on a school, right? That was produced from a contract that was issued just before the election. I'm just wondering whether, if he said, that's what I understood him to say, could he clarify whether he said, on Wolf Road, a contract for school?
Mr. Speaker.
Issued in millions.
I didn't hear him speak about millions of dollars, but I'll allow the member to clarify.
Speaker, that gives me an opportunity to speak about a piece of legislation that we're crafting right now, soon to late. That's the public procurement legislation, and how we are intending to structure the whole process of awarding a contract. And Mr. Speaker, when I made mention of the public procurement legislation, the stream of my thought as I presented them was that the fiscal responsibility bill and this motion that we're now debating is not just a one-off. It's a part of a framework that this government has brought. And so that's why I spoke to the Integrity Commission bill, because everything is designed to enforce this legislation. I just made mention of contracts that have been given that may not have observed the tenets of this act that we intend to bring. And I made mention of Wolf Road, where millions of dollars were spent. And if it's necessary, I'm quite certain that we can have that brought. Millions of dollars were spent, and you couldn't account for it. The building isn't there, and it involved one...
The member for Cat Island mentioned specifically schooling, the school you spoke of. I think that's the point you were making.
That's the point. I mean, the contract.
You had mentioned you had mentioned Yamakura the school. I think that was the point.
Yes, I mentioned the school that monies were spent, and that you don't see the result for the amount of money spent.
He didn't say that when he was speaking.
He recognizes Cat Island, Ramkins, and
The
Salvador.
complaint, as I heard it, that may have reached what he perceived to be provisions that may be contained in an act to come, right, was that the complaint was that contracts were issued just before the election. And Mr. Speaker,
One second.
then in his explanation now, he's saying that, well, this came to mind when he's talking about the work he's now doing on his procurement bill, and that he believed that those contracts may have been issued. The question, and then he introduced another specter in his explanation, the specter of funds being expended for which value was not received. Again, Mr. Speaker, it's an assertion, right, that suggests something dishonorable, untoward had gone on, right, which sullies the name, firstly, of the contractor, and those persons who may have been involved in the award of that contract, which requires, I would ask him to produce the evidence that the funds that were spent, or withdraw that on that school, right, it cannot be seen, as he said in his words, on the premises.
Get your point.
But
Yeah.
what I'm saying, if he'd responded specifically what my complaint was initially, then that would have been clear. One, was that contract issued just before the election? That's the first question. Now, if he didn't say, just say that. That's what I understood him to have said, Mr. Speaker. If he did not say that, then I misheard him. Then he could say, Mr. Speaker, I did not say that. Second point
yes,
now.
I got your points. I got your points.
But now, in his explanation, he introduced this new
I got your point. Chair recognizes Yamakura. Yamakura, the point I think that Cat Island is making is that you're making...
That wasn't a part of the pre-election contract of which I referred.
All right.
And Mr. Speaker, when I spoke to the section of the bill, third schedule, contents of a pre-election update, I didn't specify any political party. I didn't specify, I said on coming in, there are certain things that I observed. You know, I know that we sometimes think that every song is about us, but this is not about Cat Island, Ramkins, and Salvador. Yes. I'm being lucidly clear. But sometimes we are so vain, we think that every song is about us. You know, it's not about you.
Member for Yamakura, continue in the speech.
Mr. Speaker, as I said before, this act, and this motion that we're debating is a part of a larger scheme to safeguard the resources of the Bahamian people when we talk about the ease of doing business. And so that is the reason why I was identifying different acts that are being laid, some of them that are being passed, and some of the acts that we're working on and that we intend to lay, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, as I said before, as I have identified that on coming in, there were certain things that I observed, and I was saying how important this piece of legislation is. And the IDB agrees. There was wide consultation with the IMF. As a matter of fact, in the piece of the document that I read, they referred to Jamaica, Barbados, and their experience. And I want to commend the drafting section of the Attorney General's office for the comparative analysis that they did in producing this act. There was normally when we do these matters, Mr. Speaker, we send them to the bar and any number of different persons so they could have They can have sight of them. And as you very well know, we even put them on the website. So, Mr. Speaker, this, as I was saying, and I'm going to go back now to the content of a pre-election update and what is so powerful about this. This is a statement of responsibility signed by the minister that the pre-election fiscal, economic and fiscal updates include all policy discussions with material economic or fiscal implementation that the government has made before the day on which the contents of the pre-election economic and fiscal update was finalized. Mr. Speaker, one of the other things, and I heard it was made mention that we intend to do, to bring this whole thing together, Mr. Speaker, because interestingly enough, Mr. Speaker, these bills, especially the fiscal responsibility bill and a number of others that we've brought, could have been done years ago. When you look at other jurisdictions, they passed these years ago. So in many respects, we're late in the game. And so, Mr. Speaker, a part of the regime that we intend to bring is we also intend to look at electoral campaign finance reform, Mr. Speaker, to bring that piece of legislation and to shore up the fiscal responsibility legislation. What I like about it, Mr. Speaker, and I know that some light or we've made, some persons have made light of the efforts here today in bringing and having this debate, is that it also connects us with the Freedom of Information Act. And it requires us, Mr. Speaker, to make available certain information to the council. And those information must be placed on a website, must be placed so the Bahamian people can see, and they could see every possible aspect of government and how we spend the people's monies. And so when you talk about transparency, it is incorporated in this act, Mr. Speaker, for which we have been commended. And the general principles of responsible fiscal management are entailed in the act because you have to be accountable. You must consider intergenerational equity. So you just can't just spend for the day, and I hear us speak about it all the time, Mr. Speaker. You have to spend with the future in mind. You must be responsible in your activities, and I'm not pulling these out of the air. It comes from Section 6 of the Act. There must be stability in your planning. There must be transparency, Mr. Speaker. And it requires, from the Prime Minister on down, Mr. Speaker, to be a part of this process. If there's any bills that are taken outside of the general economic plan, you must produce a report and produce an explanation. And it gives members of the society to be a part of it. One of the things I don't think we highlight enough, Mr. Speaker, is the whole aspect of public consultation. As I've done before, I'll do again. Every member of Parliament has now the good opportunity to invite public discussions in your town meetings. That's including members from the opposition, and to discuss these things and to educate persons on these. So, Mr. Speaker, I support this motion. I think it's good. I think it will correct, I know that it will correct a lot of the mismanagement that has occurred. And don't mind the unrepentant attitude, Mr. Speaker. No one can deny the things have been done that are questionable. So in the spirit of which this act has been brought, is designed to assist the whole process. Is designed to assist the Bahamian government in being more accountable to the people for the monies that we get. So, Mr. Speaker, without more, I support this resolution, and I thank you.
As many. As many? As many? The chair recognizes the member for East Grand Bahama.
Oh, I'm going to go for the wrap.
Chair recognizes the member for East Grand Bahama.
Sure?
No, you don't
I'll let you speak.
Member for East Grand Bahama, you're on your feet.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
The chair recognizes the member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I'll now move for the close of the debate on the resolution. And again, the resolution, whereas the fiscal strategy report of the Ministry of Finance was duly tabled in the Honorable House on the 21st of November 2018, pursuant to Section 10.2 of the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2018. Now be it resolved that this House approves the said fiscal strategy report without amendment. Mr. Speaker, I want to first thank the members who participated in the debate for a very spirited debate. Certainly, I think that there were some educational aspects to the debate for both sides. And I think that is the sign of a good maturing democracy, and I do appreciate that. Mr. Speaker, it is interesting that there were some comments about not believing in the fiscal strategy report and seeing it as a waste of time. And that's very unfortunate, Mr. Speaker, because again, as we said in the beginning, the failure to plan is a plan to fail. And that is unfortunate, Mr. Speaker. That is really unfortunate. Mr. Speaker, there was a question about the Small Business Development Center and the $5 million or $5.5 million that the government had allocated for the funding of that venture. And I'm very pleased to say that the private sector financial institutions, namely Royal Bank and Scotiabank at the moment, have joined us in providing support for this entity to the tune now where we are able to allocate $9 million towards the funding of small business throughout the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And Mr. Speaker, it's unfortunate that the opposition side seeks to leave. I don't know what that's about. They had an opportunity to have their say. I don't know why they would want to leave and abandon the Bahamian people, but that's on them. They'll explain that. Mr. Speaker, it was interesting too, the last comment that I would make is just that there was a comment that the budget is underperforming, the revenue from the government is underperforming, and that is true to some extent. But in the same breath, they said that we ought to spend all this money. Mr. Speaker, again, it shows the disconnect that some may have with respect to how we fund, how we pay for the recurrent expenditure and the capital works that need to happen in order to keep this country running. It is no magic here. If you don't have the money, then it is very difficult to spend it. And that is why we are so intent on first having laid and passed the fiscal responsibility bill to ensure that we don't do the kinds of things we've done in the past, to spend money that we do not have. And why we are so focused on the fiscal strategy report to guide us for the next budget, so that we don't run into the kind of circumstances that we've had in the past, where we just spend money like it's going to come from somewhere. And then to have the temerity to come here and to say you have to raise the value-added tax to 12%. But why do you think we have to raise it to 12%? The government isn't making any profit, so it couldn't be that we wanted to find some slush or to have some extra money to spend. It must have been to pay for the commitments that the previous administration has brought on us, and to feed this monster that we have that's been created over time. So it's going to take some time for us to get this expenditure back down to a more normal, suitable level. But in that process, we have to be able to meet the commitments as they fall. And so we've had to take the bitter pill and to increase the value-added tax by 4%, not for our sake or for anything that we are trying to accomplish, but to pay the bills that was left there. And there's just no way that we can continue to just ignore those bills and think that they're just going to fairy tale go away. Suggestion that we span them out or spread them out over time. Well, we've done that. But there's still 65 million, I believe it's this year, or 95 million, I can't remember the number, that we have to pay this year. Same next year. And then the year after that, it starts to taper down. But if you go back to the budget, we outline that completely as to how we're going to liquidate that. And we contemplate that as we get towards the end of that paying back those arrears, we're going to be able to bring our customs duties down to compensate for that extra revenue that we collect through VAT. So again, you know, Mr. Speaker, it's unfortunate that the opposition decided that they had to leave. I don't know what that's about. Everybody had an opportunity to speak and to make their contribution. This is intended to be a very collaborative debate, discussion. Unfortunately, it became more of an attack fest, but anyway, I suppose that's what it is. And so, Mr. Speaker, with that said, I move for the resolution to be approved. And again, whereas the fiscal strategy report of the Ministry of Finance was duly tabled in the Honorable House on the 21st of November 2018, pursuant to Section 10.2 of the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2018, now be it resolved that this House approves the said fiscal strategy report without amendment. So moved.
It's being moved. Do we have a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Now be it resolved that this House approves the said fiscal strategy report without amendment. As many as are in favor remain seated. Those opposing will rise. The resolution is agreed. Further resolutions? Member? The resolution is agreed. Further members? Further resolution?
No further resolution.
Honorable members, we are further resolutions.
No further resolution.
Member statements. Appointment of select committees. And just on that matter, before we proceed, I wish to bring to the House attention, I don't see the members who have requested select committees, but we have still on the agenda 6 select committees, 5 by the member for Centerville and 1 by the member for Angleton. And I just want to put I would just want to advise members, the member for Centerville and the member for Angleton, in her absence, I guess, that those matters are on the agenda, and if you can give the chair notice when you are ready to proceed. If we are unable to accommodate you at that sitting, we will make accommodation at the very next sitting once you notify us that you are ready to proceed. Now bear in mind we're moving towards the midterm budget, and after that the annual budget, and only one motion can be on the floor at a time, and those matters can go on for several sittings. So be guided accordingly with respect to moving your select committee ahead. Instructions to select committees, discharge of select committees, notices for future meetings. Just before I recognize the member for Bamboo Town, the chair will exercise its discretion to renew all notices on behalf of Her Majesty's loyal opposition. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, it's interesting that you would have done that for and on their behalf, because, you know, if we wanted to be mischievous in this place, this would have been a good opportunity for us to sweep the entire agenda of the House of Assembly clean of all questions and issues related to Her Majesty's loyal opposition. But we are a responsible government, and we wouldn't seek to do such, even though it would have been interesting for the papers tomorrow. I renew all matters in the name of the government, and signals, Mr. Speaker, that we will meet once again in this honorable place at 10 a.m. Wednesday, February the 13th, 2019.
Thank you, honorable member. Adjournment. Adjournment.
Mr. Speaker, I do now move that the House adjourns. Yes, I move, Mr. Speaker, that the House adjourns Wednesday, 10 a.m., February 13th, 2019.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the House do adjourn to 10 a.m. Wednesday, the 13th of February. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Final adjournment.
Mr. Speaker, I do now move that the House adjourns.
Seconder? It has been moved and seconded that the House adjourns to 10 a.m. Wednesday, the 13th of February, 2019. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The House stands adjourned to Wednesday, the 13th of February at 10 a.m.